I wasn't planning on hiking that night. It was supposed to be a quiet Halloween, just hanging out with some friends. I hadn't even packed for a trip, but they convinced me to join them, saying we'd experience something real. I didn't think much of it at the time. The Catskills were only a few hours away, and the air had that crisp, fall bite to it. Perfect night for a bit of adventure. That's what they said anyway. We parked at the base of the mountain around 9 p.m., the road narrow and winding, the dark trees around us practically swallowing the headlights. It was colder than I expected, and the wind had a way of cutting through the layers I'd thrown on. We didn't waste time, just tossed our bags into the trunks of their cars, grabbed some flashlights, and headed up the trail. The full moon barely pierced the clouds, and the forest felt different. It wasn't the kind of night you'd want to be alone in the woods. But there I was. They were excited, joking about cryptids and ghost stories, all the usual Halloween nonsense. I half listened, letting the chill in the air numb my mind. They had plans that involved going off the trail to explore an old logging site that had been abandoned years ago. The others didn't seem concerned by the idea. They just wanted to explore, to say they had done something crazy on Halloween. As we left the main trail, the sounds of the forest grew muted. The wind, the rustling leaves, the occasional animal, all seemed to fade. The only sound left was our footsteps on the dry, crinkling ground. It wasn't like any forest I'd been in before. The trees were closer together, the underbrush thicker, and there was an unsettling quiet that had settled over everything. I remember glancing at the others as they joked, and I could feel the shift in the air around us. There was something wrong about it, but I couldn't place my finger on it. We reached the old logging site an hour later. A few rotting beams and crushed stone piles marked what was once a busy camp. Now it was just scattered debris, crumbling wood, and the oppressive dark. The air felt thick, suffocating almost, like the trees themselves were closing in on us. I could hear my breathing get louder, feel my chest tightening as we walked deeper into the ruins. They were too distracted by their conversation to notice the change in the atmosphere. I kept walking, pretending like everything was fine, but something wasn't. It felt as if something was watching us, waiting in the shadows of the trees. My flashlight flickered for a moment, casting long, stretching shadows across the ground, and I swore I saw something move in the corner of my eye. I stopped walking, straining to see through the dark, but the others were still talking, moving further along the broken path. I caught up with them, trying to shake the growing unease that was starting to build up in me. That's when I saw the eyes. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some kind of reflection from my flashlight, but when I looked again, the eyes were still there, staring back at me from the depths of the trees. Two glowing spots, faint but unmistakable, hidden deep within the dark. They didn't blink, didn't move, just remained fixed in place, following us. I didn't say anything at first. I figured it was an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, but the eyes didn't seem like they were from any animal I'd ever seen. They were too deliberate, too focused. I stayed quiet, not wanting to seem paranoid. The others were too caught up in their stories to notice anything. The laughter grew louder, and with it, the tension around me seemed to deepen. I looked back at the eyes, and that's when it happened, the snapping of a branch. It wasn't just the usual creak of the forest. This was sharp, sudden, and close. I spun around, searching the shadows, but there was nothing. Nothing except the faint sound of the wind in the trees. I didn't want to mention it to the others. They'd laugh. They'd think I was just spooked, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. We walked on, moving away from the logging site. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, that nothing was wrong, but the silence of the forest, the way the shadows clung to every corner, made it feel like we were being swallowed whole. I thought about turning back, heading back to the car, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin the night. The others were still joking about whatever cryptid was supposed to haunt these woods. Something about a man-sized creature with glowing eyes. Ridiculous. I laughed along, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread creeping up my spine. And then the sounds started. At first, it was small branches snapping underfoot, the crunching of leaves. But then it became louder, more distinct. as if someone or something was moving in the woods with us. It wasn't the usual rustle of small animals. It was heavier, more deliberate. The ground beneath us seemed to shift, as though something large was moving through the underbrush, not far from us. My heart started to pound in my chest, and I realized with a sickening certainty that we weren't alone. The others hadn't noticed yet. They were still laughing, still making jokes, but I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to face them, about to suggest we head back, but before I could speak, something snapped loud and close, right behind us. Everyone froze. The joking stopped, the air thick with silence, and for a long moment, no one moved. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what was out there, but I knew something was watching us. I could feel it. I felt it in the way the trees seemed to press in the way the darkness swallowed everything around us. We started walking faster, the casual pace now replaced with urgency. But the path, it wasn't right. It wasn't the same. The forest seemed to shift, like the trees were growing closer, blocking our way. It was like the woods were pulling us deeper, and the more we tried to move, the harder it became to get back on track. Every turn felt wrong, like we weren't just lost, we were being led in the wrong direction. I don't know how long we wandered. Time lost meaning out there. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, and no matter which way we turned, the sense of being trapped grew stronger. I could feel the weight of the eyes on me, always just behind me, watching, waiting. The others were panicking now. The laughter had stopped completely. There was no joke, no conversation left. Just fear, palpable and thick in the air. It wasn't until dawn that we finally found our way back to the car. The first light of morning broke through the trees, casting a pale, watery light on everything around us. We stumbled out of the forest, exhausted and shaken, but none of us spoke about what had happened. We didn't need to. We all knew something was out there that night. Something that wasn't just part of the forest, but something unnatural. I haven't been back to the Catskills since. I don't know what it was that followed us that night, but I know what I felt, and what I felt was real. Something was waiting out there, something that wasn't afraid to follow you home. It was Halloween night, and we were bored. It wasn't a bad kind of boredom, just the kind that drifts in when you're too old to go trick-or-treating but still want to do something that feels a little spooky. We were sitting around, trying to think of something to do, when someone, probably Dylan, who was always up for anything, suggested we check out that pumpkin patch up the road. The one people around here said was haunted. First, we laughed it off. Haunted? Sure. We figured it would be a typical Halloween thing. Maybe a couple of creepy props, an old barn with fake cobwebs, and a few spooky sounds played through speakers. The kind of stuff you see at every other patch this time of year. It didn't seem like anything we needed to worry about. The farm was only about 10 minutes from where we lived, just past the edge of town. We pulled up in Dylan's car, headlights cutting through the thickening fog as we drove down a long dirt road. The patch itself was situated just beyond the trees, nestled between the twisted remains of an old barn and a field that stretched out farther than I cared to look. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Too quiet. There wasn't the usual hum of people talking, the chatter of kids running through the rows of pumpkins, or even the rustling of wind through leaves. Just an oppressive stillness that seemed to hang over everything. The sign at the entrance was worn, with chipped paint that read, "Shady Grove Pumpkin Patch, open for the season." The words were slanted, like they'd been hanging there far too long without anyone bothering to touch them. The gate was open, but there was no one around. No lights either, just a single dim bulb near the barn, casting long shadows against the rows of pumpkins that sprawled out into the field. We didn't say much as we parked the car and got out. Maybe we were all a little unnerved by the emptiness, but we didn't want to admit it. Dylan led the way, of course, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold, and we followed. The air smelled earthy, like the inside of a root cellar, stale and musty. The pumpkins, though, they were perfect. Way too perfect. They sat in neat rows, the orange of them impossibly vibrant, even in the dim light. I've been to enough pumpkin patches to know that they don't all look like that. Some are shriveled, some are a little moldy, but these were like they'd just been harvested from some factory farm and placed out for decoration. We wandered deeper into the patch, the rows of pumpkins stretching far into the distance. The ground beneath our feet felt spongy, like something had been soaking into it for years. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the usual feeling you get on a crisp Halloween night. It felt like the place itself hadn't been touched in a long time, like it was frozen in time, waiting for something. As we made our way toward the back of the field, where the rows of pumpkins met a sparse cornfield, the silence deepened. It was so quiet now that even the occasional rustle of the leaves sounded unnatural, like it was being forced out by the stillness. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching us from between the rows of pumpkins, but the space was empty. Still, that feeling of being watched was hard to shake. Then we heard it, a low, guttural hum that seemed to come from the field itself. It wasn't the sound of the wind through the corn or any animal. No, this was something different. The sound wasn't just unsettling. It was almost purposeful, like it was coming from somewhere deeper in the ground, from something that had been buried there for a long time. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us. The others didn't seem to react right away, but that sound, it dug its way under my skin, curling around my nerves. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, and my breath hitched in my throat. There was something wrong about it, something that didn't belong here. But none of us said anything, not at first. I'm not sure why I walked away from the group, but something drew me toward the source of the hum. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was just the urge to prove that I wasn't afraid of some stupid sound. I moved between the rows of pumpkins, the tops of them brushing against my arms, the orange skin of the gourds cool and hard to the touch. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, until I was almost completely alone, surrounded by the stillness. And then I saw it. It was just a flicker at first, a shadow moving quickly between the rows of pumpkins, just at the edge of my vision. My stomach tightened, and my heart began to pound. I stopped in my tracks, trying to focus on where the shadow had been. But when I looked, there was nothing. Nothing but pumpkins, stretching out into the darkness. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But the longer I stood, the more I felt like something was watching me. I didn't dare move. That's when I saw it again. A shape tall and thin, moving between the rows of pumpkins. It wasn't human, not fully. It was like a figure that didn't belong, too long and stretched, like it was somehow bending the space around it. I froze. It was gone in a blink, and I couldn't tell if I had imagined it or not. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. That hum, that sound, seemed louder now, vibrating through my skull. My feet were heavy, rooted to the ground, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I turned and ran back to my friends without saying a word. I didn't look back. We left shortly after that, none of us speaking about what had happened. Maybe we all felt it. The heavy air, the hum, the feeling of being watched, but none of us wanted to admit it. We piled into Dylan's car and drove off, the fog swallowing the pumpkin patch behind us. The sound of the hum lingered in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there, something that had been watching us. To this day, I still think about that night, especially around Halloween. I've tried to tell myself it was nothing, that we were just spooked by a strange place. But the hum, that sound, and the figure I saw, those things don't go away. Every Halloween, when the fog rolls in and the air gets thick, I still hear that hum in the back of my mind, and I know that whatever was out there that night, it was waiting for us. Still waiting. It was Halloween night, and we were bored. It wasn't a bad kind of boredom, just the kind that drifts in when you're too old to go trick-or-treating but still want to do something that feels a little spooky. We were sitting around, trying to think of something to do, when someone, probably Dylan, who was always up for anything, suggested we check out that pumpkin patch up the road. The one people around here said was haunted. First, we laughed it off. Haunted? Sure. We figured it would be a typical Halloween thing. Maybe a couple of creepy props, an old barn with fake cobwebs, and a few spooky sounds played through speakers. The kind of stuff you see at every other patch this time of year. It didn't seem like anything we needed to worry about. The farm was only about 10 minutes from where we lived, just past the edge of town. We pulled up in Dylan's car, headlights cutting through the thickening fog as we drove down a long dirt road. The patch itself was situated just beyond the trees, nestled between the twisted remains of an old barn and a field that stretched out farther than I cared to look. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Too quiet. There wasn't the usual hum of people talking, the chatter of kids running through the rows of pumpkins, or even the rustling of wind through leaves. Just an oppressive stillness that seemed to hang over everything. The sign at the entrance was worn, with chipped paint that read, "Shady Grove Pumpkin Patch, open for the season." The words were slanted, like they'd been hanging there far too long without anyone bothering to touch them. The gate was open, but there was no one around. No lights either, just a single dim bulb near the barn, casting long shadows against the rows of pumpkins that sprawled out into the field. We didn't say much as we parked the car and got out. Maybe we were all a little unnerved by the emptiness, but we didn't want to admit it. Dylan led the way, of course, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold, and we followed. The air smelled earthy, like the inside of a root cellar, stale and musty. The pumpkins, though, they were perfect. Way too perfect. They sat in neat rows, the orange of them impossibly vibrant, even in the dim light. I've been to enough pumpkin patches to know that they don't all look like that. Some are shriveled, some are a little moldy, but these were like they'd just been harvested from some factory farm and placed out for decoration. We wandered deeper into the patch, the rows of pumpkins stretching far into the distance. The ground beneath our feet felt spongy, like something had been soaking into it for years. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the usual feeling you get on a crisp Halloween night. It felt like the place itself hadn't been touched in a long time, like it was frozen in time, waiting for something. As we made our way toward the back of the field, where the rows of pumpkins met a sparse cornfield, the silence deepened. It was so quiet now that even the occasional rustle of the leaves sounded unnatural, like it was being forced out by the stillness. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching us from between the rows of pumpkins, but the space was empty. Still, that feeling of being watched was hard to shake. Then we heard it, a low, guttural hum that seemed to come from the field itself. It wasn't the sound of the wind through the corn or any animal. No, this was something different. The sound wasn't just unsettling. It was almost purposeful, like it was coming from somewhere deeper in the ground, from something that had been buried there for a long time. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us. The others didn't seem to react right away, but that sound, it dug its way under my skin, curling around my nerves. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, and my breath hitched in my throat. There was something wrong about it, something that didn't belong here. But none of us said anything, not at first. I'm not sure why I walked away from the group, but something drew me toward the source of the hum. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was just the urge to prove that I wasn't afraid of some stupid sound. I moved between the rows of pumpkins, the tops of them brushing against my arms, the orange skin of the gourds cool and hard to the touch. The deeper I went, the quieter it got, until I was almost completely alone, surrounded by the stillness. And then I saw it. It was just a flicker at first, a shadow moving quickly between the rows of pumpkins, just at the edge of my vision. My stomach tightened, and my heart began to pound. I stopped in my tracks, trying to focus on where the shadow had been. But when I looked, there was nothing. Nothing but pumpkins, stretching out into the darkness. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But the longer I stood, the more I felt like something was watching me. I didn't dare move. That's when I saw it again. A shape tall and thin, moving between the rows of pumpkins. It wasn't human, not fully. It was like a figure that didn't belong, too long and stretched, like it was somehow bending the space around it. I froze. It was gone in a blink, and I couldn't tell if I had imagined it or not. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. That hum, that sound, seemed louder now, vibrating through my skull. My feet were heavy, rooted to the ground, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I turned and ran back to my friends without saying a word. I didn't look back. We left shortly after that, none of us speaking about what had happened. Maybe we all felt it. The heavy air, the hum, the feeling of being watched, but none of us wanted to admit it. We piled into Dylan's car and drove off, the fog swallowing the pumpkin patch behind us. The sound of the hum lingered in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there, something that had been watching us. To this day, I still think about that night, especially around Halloween. I've tried to tell myself it was nothing, that we were just spooked by a strange place. But the hum, that sound, and the figure I saw, those things don't go away. Every Halloween, when the fog rolls in and the air gets thick, I still hear that hum in the back of my mind, and I know that whatever was out there that night, it was waiting for us. Still waiting. I've always been fascinated by abandoned places, old, forgotten buildings with histories that no one talks about anymore. The decay, the silence, the sense that time has stood still in some forgotten corner of the world, untouched by the present. So, when Halloween came around and my friends and I were brainstorming something to do, I suggested we check out the old asylum on the edge of town. I'd heard stories about it, of course. Every town has those stories about places like this, but I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I just thought it would be a good place to get some creepy pictures, share some stories, and, honestly, experience something a little different for the holiday. We drove out there late in the afternoon, as the sky was fading into dusk. The building loomed in the distance, barely visible through the overgrown trees and brush. It was a massive structure, built long ago with jagged stone walls that had been cracked by time and neglect. I could feel the weight of its history the closer we got. It was hard to believe people had once lived here, that there had been life in these halls. Now it was nothing but ruin. The windows were shattered, and the door to the entrance hung loosely on its hinges. We parked on the side of the road and made our way through the weeds toward the front door. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and rotting wood. Every step we took seemed to echo against the decaying walls of the asylum. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. Dust choked the air, and the floor creaked with each movement. We didn't say much at first, just the occasional whisper of excitement or nervous laughter. But the further we went into the building, the quieter we became, as if the place itself demanded it. The asylum had long since lost its original function, but remnants of its past still lingered. Broken chairs, shattered glass, old medical equipment lying discarded in forgotten corners. Some of the rooms looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. It was surreal. The peeling wallpaper, the rusty bed frames, the strange, lingering smell of something that had been abandoned for too long. It all felt like the building was holding onto its past, not letting it go. After a while, we split up to explore. I wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, I preferred it. There was something about the solitude of the place, the sense of isolation, that drew me in. I wandered through the dark hallways, moving deeper into the asylum, past rooms that were nothing but empty spaces now. As I walked, the temperature seemed to drop. I couldn't explain it, but it was like the further I got into the building, the colder it became. The air felt dense, like I was walking through a fog, though the room itself was completely dry. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the old building's way of reacting to the weather. Eventually, I found myself at the top of a set of stairs leading down into the basement. The steps were crumbling, and the wood creaked under my weight, but I descended anyway. It was darker down there, with only a faint sliver of light coming through a crack in the stone wall. The basement smelled like mildew and decay. The walls were wet with moisture, and I could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. I didn't know why I kept going. Maybe it was the lure of the unknown, or maybe it was just the fact that I was alone, and there was a strange kind of peace in that. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and that's when I noticed it. A room tucked away in the far corner of the basement, its door slightly ajar. It looked untouched, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The dust on the floor was thick, undisturbed. I stepped closer, my curiosity pushing me forward. I pushed the door open, and the room beyond it was just as I expected, empty, but with an eerie stillness to it. It looked like a storage room, with old crates piled against the walls, some of them falling apart at the edges. But there was something else, something in the air that made the room feel off. I stepped inside, and the moment I did, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just the air getting colder, it felt like the room itself had somehow become colder, as if the walls were sucking out the warmth. The air was heavy, thick, almost suffocating. My breath came out in little puffs, like it was the middle of winter. I didn't know why, but something about this room made me uneasy. I turned around to leave, but before I could take a step, I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't loud at first. It was faint, like it was coming from every corner of the room at once. I froze, straining to listen. It sounded like someone was speaking in a language I didn't understand, a low murmur that filled the space. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel them crawling under my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. I stepped back, toward the door, but the whisper grew louder, and then I heard it clearly. My name. It was my name, whispered so softly I could almost taste it. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't just a sound. It was something more, like the walls were speaking to me, like the building itself knew who I was and was calling me. The temperature dropped even more, and I could feel my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The walls seemed to close in around me. The room felt smaller, tighter, like it was suffocating me. My legs were stiff, my mind racing, but my body wouldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed, frozen in place by the sound of my name echoing around the room. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like an eternity, but in reality, it was probably only a few seconds. The whisper continued, a soft, insistent sound that gnawed at my nerves. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Something deep inside me snapped, and I bolted out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't even care to see what was behind me, what might be following me. I ran up the stairs, through the hallways, and out of the building. My friends were waiting near the entrance, looking confused but relieved to see me. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. They could see the panic in my eyes, the way my hands were shaking. We left then, and I never went back to that place. For a long time, I didn't talk about it. I didn't want to, but every time Halloween rolls around, I think about that basement, about that whisper. Whatever it was down there, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It wasn't some prank or the result of too much excitement. I felt something in that room, something that wasn't right, something that was watching me, waiting, and I still don't know what it wanted. All I know is that I'll never go back to that asylum. Whatever was in that basement, it's still there, and it's still waiting. The night air was thick with humidity as I drove down that desolate stretch of road outside of Biloxi. It was Halloween night, October 31st, 2016, and I was on my way to a party, eager to get there and have some fun. The radio played softly, the low hum of the tires against the asphalt making a rhythmic sound that should have been comforting. But for some reason, I felt uneasy. I was alone, miles from any town or familiar landmark, and the darkness outside the car felt oppressive, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. My car suddenly sputtered, jolting me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the dashboard. The gas gauge read empty, but that didn't make sense. I'd filled up just a few days ago. The engine gave one last shudder and stalled completely. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the dead instrument panel, hoping for something to happen, but it was just me and the darkness. The air felt heavier now, the usual warmth of Mississippi October replaced with something colder, like the humidity had taken on a new edge. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Cursing under my breath, I pulled out my phone to check for service. Of course, there was nothing. No bars, no signal. I let out a frustrated sigh and opened the door, stepping out into the silence. The road stretched out in front of me, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to close in around the car, blocking out what little moonlight there was. There wasn't a house or any sign of civilization for miles. I couldn't even see the faint glow of lights in the distance. I slammed the door behind me, locking it out of habit. The air was still and thick. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant croak of a frog or two. I started walking down the road, hoping to find something. A house, a light, anything. There was no movement except for the faint sway of the trees in the breeze. But the longer I walked, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot seemed to be echoed by another set of footsteps. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was the wind or my own echo. But then it happened again. Slow, measured steps, following my every move. I stopped, turned around, and scanned the road behind me. There was nothing, just the empty road, the trees, and the thick dark. I shook my head, trying to clear the odd feeling settling over me. It was just the isolation, I thought. Nothing more. But when I started walking again, I heard it again. Those soft, deliberate footsteps, keeping pace with mine. Closer now, not quite in sync, but definitely getting closer with each step I took. I stopped again, spinning around quickly, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't see anything, but the footsteps were undeniable. I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep moving. Maybe it was a person walking behind me, just someone out for a late-night walk. The idea was far-fetched, but I tried to convince myself of it. I pushed forward, my heart pounding in my chest now, the echo of those steps never far behind. But then, out of nowhere, the air seemed to shift. A sound pierced the night, like nails dragged across a chalkboard, loud and jarring, splitting through the quiet. It made me stop dead in my tracks. My ears rang with the screech, and for a moment, all I could do was stand there, frozen, as the sound echoed around me. I didn't even think. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as I could, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, my legs burning as I pushed myself harder and harder. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but I couldn't. The screech, the footsteps, none of it made sense. I ran for what felt like an eternity, but the road never seemed to end. The trees were a blur as I passed them, the dark shape of them looming just beyond the edges of my vision. My breath was ragged now, my chest tight. I had to keep going. I had to find something. After what seemed like miles, I saw it, a dim light up ahead. A gas station. The relief I felt in that moment was almost overwhelming, but I didn't stop running. I didn't slow down until I reached the small building. I burst through the door, nearly tripping over the threshold, and skidded to a stop at the counter. The attendant behind the counter looked up at me, his face blank, his eyes dull. I tried to catch my breath, but the words wouldn't come out at first. When I finally managed to get the question out, I asked him if there was anyone around, if there were any houses nearby, anyone who lived out this way. He stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. I felt my heart pound in my chest, but I didn't look away. Finally, he spoke in a flat, almost bored voice. "No one lives out here," he said. "Ain't been no houses for miles. Just you and the road." I looked at him for a long time, trying to figure out if he was just another weird local or if he knew something I didn't. But he didn't say anything else, just stared at me like I was crazy for even asking. I left shortly after that, still feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. The world outside the gas station was dark and silent again. My car was still back down the road, and I didn't have the energy to go back. My hands were shaking when I grabbed the keys, but I started the engine anyway. I didn't care about the party anymore. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, just waiting in the dark. The air still felt thick, like something was there, something that had been watching me the whole time. I couldn't explain the footsteps, the screech, or the feeling that had never left me, but I know what I heard. I know what I felt. Whatever was out there, I wasn't the only one on that road that night. I drove out there on the night of October 31st, 2021. The woods near Salem were more isolated than I had imagined. There were no streetlights, no homes nearby. Just me, the trees, and the endless stretch of road leading into the unknown. I followed the directions I'd gotten from an old map online. As I turned off the main road, the trees began to close in around me, their branches like long fingers reaching out, blocking the last bit of light from the fading moon. My headlights cut through the thickening fog, illuminating the dirt road ahead. It felt like a scene out of an old horror movie. Too quiet, too perfect, like the world had swallowed the sound of my engine. The closer I got to Witch's Hollow, the more I felt it. Something I couldn't name, a nagging discomfort. I kept driving until I saw the small clearing up ahead. It wasn't much, a stretch of land between the trees, maybe a few dozen feet across, surrounded by thick forest. The map had said this was it, Witch's Hollow, the place where the accused women were said to have been brought. The place where history felt too close. I parked the car, the engine humming softly before I turned it off. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. The sound of my door opening seemed deafening. The air was cold, even for late October. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and stepped out onto the dirt path leading into the clearing. The trees around me were still, too still. The wind, which should have been howling through the branches of the evergreens, was dead silent. I had expected a sense of history, of something ominous in the air. But what I hadn't expected was how heavy the silence would be. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't comforting. It felt like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something. As I walked deeper into the clearing, the feeling grew stronger. My heart began to pound in my chest, and I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. The clearing should have felt open, free, but it felt anything but. The trees formed a barrier around me, and the shadows they cast were long and dark, even though the moon should have been high enough to break through. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if it was real, but the shadows seemed to move, shifting in a way they shouldn't. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the trees, just outside the clearing. At first, I thought it was a person in a costume. A woman, tall, dressed in black, just standing there, staring at me. It was Halloween after all. I thought maybe someone had come out here for a photo op or some weird reenactment. But then I noticed something off. She wasn't moving, not at all. She just stood there, motionless, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I called out, half expecting her to turn around and wave or laugh. Nothing. She didn't even twitch. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was nothing, just someone out here enjoying the night like I was. Still, I felt an uncomfortable tightness in my chest as I started walking toward her. I didn't know why I felt drawn to her, but I did. It wasn't curiosity. It was like I had to see her up close, to prove something to myself. I took a few steps closer, the crunch of leaves underfoot breaking the eerie silence. But when I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. She wasn't standing on the ground. She was hovering, just above it, her feet not touching the dirt. She floated effortlessly in place, her body unnaturally still. The wind, which had been completely absent until that point, seemed to stir at that moment, ruffling the hem of her long, black coat, but not in any natural way. It was as if the air around her was moving differently from the rest of the world, as if she was surrounded by some invisible force. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt my legs go weak. The rational part of me screamed to run, to turn around and get the hell out of there. But I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, staring at her, at the way she just hovered there, unblinking, unmoving. The longer I looked at her, the more wrong everything seemed. It wasn't just the way she floated, it was everything. The stillness of the air, the dead silence, the fact that I hadn't heard her move at all, not even a rustle of fabric. It wasn't just the way she looked, it was the way the space around her seemed different, like she wasn't part of this world. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. 1 second she was there, staring at me, and the next, nothing. Not a sound, not a movement, nothing. I don't know how long I stood there. Time seemed to stretch and distort, like I was caught in a bad dream. I turned in every direction, scanning the trees, hoping for some kind of explanation. But there was nothing. No sign of her, no movement in the shadows, nothing to suggest that anything had ever been there. It was like she had never existed at all. But I knew what I had seen. I knew she had been there, just a few feet away, staring at me. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I had no desire to stick around and try. Without a second thought, I turned and ran back to the car, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground as the fog closed in behind me. I didn't stop running until I was inside the car, the engine roaring to life as I sped away. I didn't look back. To this day, I still don't know what I saw that night. I can't explain the woman who floated at the edge of the trees, or the overwhelming sense of wrongness that filled the air. I can't explain the stillness, the silence, or the fact that she vanished without a trace. All I know is that Witch's Hollow is a place I will never visit again. Whatever it was that night, it was real, and it's something I'll never be able to forget. October 31st, 2019. I remember the night so clearly. Everything about it felt like it was supposed to be perfect. It was Halloween, the air cool and crisp, the kind of night that felt made for a little adventure. My friends and I had been planning it for weeks, an exploration of an abandoned mansion on the edge of town. Everyone had heard the stories, the rumors that the place was haunted, that it was cursed, the usual stuff, but we weren't scared. We were excited. Halloween night seemed like the right time to see if there was any truth to the stories. The mansion loomed in front of us as we parked on the gravel drive, its silhouette dark against the moonlit sky. It was a huge house, gothic in a way that made it look more like a prop from a horror movie than something that belonged in the real world. The windows were all boarded up, and the ivy that had climbed over the walls seemed to be slowly swallowing it whole. The front door, although old and weathered, was wide open, inviting us in. I don't know why I agreed to go inside. It wasn't because I thought it would be fun, but there was something about it. The way the house stood there, waiting like it had been waiting for years for someone to step inside. We walked into the entryway, and the first thing I noticed was the air. It was thick, heavy, like the house hadn't been opened up in decades. The smell hit me first. Old dust, rotting wood, and something else I couldn't place. It was the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes, to your skin, to your memories. The house was enormous. We had only made it a few steps into the hall when I could already tell how far it stretched, beyond the reach of my flashlight, down long, dark corridors. The floor creaked with every step, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, that it was breathing with us. I didn't want to admit it, but something felt off. My skin prickled, and the back of my neck was on fire. The air felt different in here, thick in a way that made it harder to breathe. We moved deeper into the house. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, faded and yellow with age. The furniture was all old and covered with dust, abandoned and forgotten. Everything seemed frozen in time, like it hadn't been touched in years. But the strangest part was the photographs. We kept finding them, old pictures of people I didn't recognize, framed in dark wood. Their faces were all serious, their eyes unblinking, following us wherever we went. I didn't want to look at them. The eyes, they made me uncomfortable. They seemed to see right through me, to know something I didn't. Every time I passed one, I could feel the weight of their gaze, lingering long after I had moved on. The deeper we went into the mansion, the stranger things got. The air felt heavier with each room we entered, as if the house was getting closer, closing in on us. The floors groaned beneath us, and the old wooden doors creaked with every step. There were places that seemed darker than others, corners where the flashlight's beam couldn't seem to reach. At one point, we were standing in a long hallway, our footsteps echoing off the walls. I was in the middle with two of my friends ahead of me and one behind. I stopped for a second, just to take in the eerie silence. It was so quiet. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to listen closely. That's when I heard it. A whisper. My name. I froze. It was faint, almost too soft to hear, but it was there. It wasn't coming from anyone near me. It wasn't any of my friends. I turned around, but there was no one behind me. My heart started racing. I didn't want to acknowledge it at first. I thought maybe it was the wind, or maybe I'd imagined it. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The whisper came again, this time clearer. My name, said so softly, but there was no one there. I looked at my friends, and none of them seemed to have heard it. They were all walking ahead, not even noticing me stop. But I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor. I felt like something was waiting for me to turn around, to look deeper into the dark. But I couldn't. Instead, I forced myself to catch up with the others, hoping I could shake the unease. But the feeling stayed with me. Every time we moved to a new room, it felt like the house itself was getting tighter, like the walls were shifting. The shadows in the corners were darker, thicker, and they seemed to move with us. We explored for what felt like hours, moving from room to room, always searching for something to explain why this place felt the way it did. But every time we turned a corner, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I was starting to feel like we were no longer alone in the house. The last room we went into was a large, open space, a ballroom maybe, though it was impossible to tell in the dark. The air was staler here, thicker. As I walked into the room, the door behind me slammed shut. I jumped, startled. I turned around, but there was no one there to explain it. I knew we hadn't shut it. It had slammed on its own. My heart began to pound, and I glanced around the room, hoping to see one of my friends. But they were nowhere in sight. I called out to them, but there was no answer. The silence was overwhelming. Couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the shadows stretched longer, darker. I could feel it then. Something was behind me, watching me. My skin crawled, and I couldn't shake the sensation that something was moving just out of the corner of my vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I heard a scuffle of footsteps, but they weren't mine. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if the house was playing tricks on me. I didn't stay much longer after that. My legs were shaking, and my chest felt tight. I found the others eventually, and we hurried out of the room. The house felt alive, pressing in on us, urging us to leave. When I reached the front door, I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. We got in the car and drove away in silence, each of us too shaken to speak. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know why the doors slammed or why the whispering voice called my name, but I felt it. I felt the house pressing on us, pushing us out. I didn't go back, and I don't think I ever will. I had never been the type to shy away from a challenge, especially on Halloween. So, when my friends dared me to spend the night in the old, abandoned house at the end of Maple Street, I couldn't turn it down. It had been sitting there, empty for as long as I could remember, an eyesore on an otherwise quiet street. People had always told stories about the house, how it used to belong to a wealthy family who vanished overnight, how strange things happened inside. It was one of those places that everyone in town avoided, and naturally, the more they talked about it, the more curious I became. I don't know what possessed me to think it would be fun. Maybe it was the thrill of the dare, or maybe it was the fact that I'd never seen the inside. Whatever it was, I found myself standing in front of the house that night, my flashlight shining weakly against the old brick walls. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. The house looked even more imposing than I had imagined. The wind was picking up, rustling the leaves scattered around the yard, but the place felt dead, like it was cut off from the rest of the world. I pushed open the creaky gate and walked up the cracked pathway, feeling the damp earth beneath my boots. The closer I got to the door, the more I felt a strange pull in my chest, a sense of hesitation that grew stronger with each step. But I ignored it. I had to. I wasn't about to back down now. The front door was slightly ajar, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt a shift in the air. It was colder than it should have been for late October. The house smelled old, musty, like mildew and dust. The wooden floors creaked under my weight as I walked further in, my footsteps echoing through the stillness. I clicked on my flashlight, sweeping it over the hallway. There was a thick layer of dust everywhere, as though no one had touched this place in decades. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, yellowed with age, and the once grand staircase loomed ahead of me, its banister broken and chipped. I could hear my own breathing, the only sound in the house besides the faint creaking of the house settling. I stood there for a moment, listening, but the silence was oppressive. There was a feeling in the air, a heaviness, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I took a step forward, my feet moving on their own despite the growing unease in my gut. As I made my way through the house, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The hallway stretched out before me, endless, with rooms on either side. Some of the doors were closed, while others hung slightly open, the darkness inside them swallowing up any light that came near. I hesitated before opening one of the doors, the old handle cold beneath my fingers. When I pushed it open, the room was empty, but the air inside felt strange, like it had been sealed off for years. The walls were bare except for a few cobwebs hanging from the ceiling, and the floor was littered with broken furniture. I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows, and that's when I saw it. On the far wall, a large, framed photograph. I walked toward it, drawn to it for some reason I couldn't explain. The photo was of a family, an older couple with 2 children. Their smiles were stiff, like they were posing for the camera, but there was something about their eyes that made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the more I stared at the photo, the more uncomfortable I felt. It was as if they were looking directly at me, as if they knew I was there, even though the picture was decades old. I turned away quickly, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I had to keep moving. I walked deeper into the house, exploring room after room, finding nothing but dust and decay. But the further I went, the stronger the feeling grew. It was as though the house was pushing me, urging me to go deeper, to find something I wasn't supposed to. The air felt thicker, colder, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was fear or just adrenaline, but something told me I needed to leave. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled further in. Then I heard it, a faint sound, like a whisper, coming from upstairs. It was so soft that I almost thought I imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice. My pulse quickened. Who could be in the house? The door had been wide open when I arrived, and there hadn't been anyone around. I considered leaving, but I was too far in now. Couldn't turn back. I made my way toward the stairs, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The air upstairs felt colder, and the silence was even more pronounced. I moved cautiously down the hall, my flashlight flickering as if it couldn't keep up with the weight of the house's darkness. I reached the last door on the right, the one that looked as though it had been untouched for years. It was slightly ajar, and I could see the faintest sliver of light coming from within. I pushed the door open, the sound of the hinges protesting as they scraped against the wood. The room was large, with a bed in the center and old furniture covered in white sheets. There was nothing particularly strange about it, but the floor was littered with debris, broken glass, torn paper, dust. In the far corner, something caught my eye, a small wooden box, half hidden beneath an old rug. I walked toward it, feeling a strange compulsion to touch it. When I knelt down and reached for the box, my fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. It was locked, but there was a keyhole. My heart pounded as I pulled it out, carefully lifting it. When I did, I noticed something strange, a small, faded tag on the bottom of the box. I flipped it over and read the inscription, barely visible in the dim light. To our beloved daughter, 1941. The name, written in an elegant script, was faded, but it sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know why, but it felt wrong to open it. Something about the box seemed out of place, like it didn't belong in this house, like it had been left there intentionally for me to find. I put it back down and backed away, suddenly feeling very aware of the silence surrounding me. That's when the whisper came again, louder this time, like it was right behind me. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned around quickly, the flashlight darting around the room, but there was nothing there. No one. The house was empty, but I could still hear the voice, low, guttural, like a mumble from the other side of a door. I didn't wait another second. I bolted from the room, running down the stairs, my feet pounding against the old wooden steps. The house seemed to groan around me, as if it was alive, responding to my panic. I reached the front door and pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My pulse raced as I yanked harder, finally throwing the door open with all my strength. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing on the porch, gasping for breath. I could still hear the whisper, echoing in my mind, but I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I was done. The house had shown me enough. Whatever it was that had been inside, whatever had been waiting for me, I wasn't going to find out. I left that night and I haven't been back. I still don't know what happened, what I felt in that house. I don't know who the family was or what the box meant, but something in that house didn't want me there, and I don't plan on testing it again. I've never been one to enjoy Halloween. It's not that I'm scared of the usual stuff, ghosts, goblins, or even the fake blood everywhere. It's just that Halloween always felt like a time when the world tried to push you into a box, to make you feel a certain way. It's the one night people expect you to act out, to get spooked. And every year, I'd avoid it, stay inside, and keep the lights off. This year, though, I didn't get a choice. My buddies were adamant. They didn't care that I didn't like it. "You need to get out more," they said. "Halloween's not so bad. We're going to the woods. It'll be a real adventure." I didn't think much of it at first. The plan was simple enough. Drive up to a cabin near a lake, sit around a fire, tell some stories, and forget about the world for a night. We didn't need much. Just a few bags, some drinks, and a couple of flashlights. The cabin was secluded, about an hour outside of town, deep in the woods. It was a perfect getaway, or so I thought. When we arrived, the place looked like something out of a postcard. The old cabin sat at the edge of the lake, with trees surrounding it on every side. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground, making everything look more distant, like a dream. As we unloaded the car, the air felt heavier, cooler. I shrugged it off, but there was something about the way the breeze moved through the trees, a sort of tension to it. My friends didn't notice. They were too busy setting up the fire pit, getting ready for the night. I walked around the cabin, just trying to stretch my legs, when I noticed a trail leading into the woods. It looked like an old hiking path, the kind you'd see on a map, worn down by time and nature. I figured I'd explore it the next morning, but when night came and the fire was lit, I found myself staring into the dark woods. There was something unsettling about how quiet it was. The fire crackled and popped, but otherwise it was eerily still. Even the animals seemed to stay away, as if they had disappeared altogether. It was a strange feeling, like the world was holding its breath. My friends didn't care. They were laughing, drinking, and making plans for the next day, but I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. It felt too quiet, too still. The air was thick, almost like it was pressing against me, but no one else seemed to notice. I didn't want to be the downer, so I stayed quiet, but I couldn't stop looking at the woods. The trees were so dark, their trunks twisting in ways that didn't seem natural. The deeper into the forest they went, the more the shadows seemed to swallow everything. At some point, I realized I wasn't the only one watching. I glanced around the fire, half expecting someone to call me out, but no one was looking in my direction. Instead, I saw it. In the distance, beyond the flickering shadows of the firelight, something moved. I froze. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal. It was too slow, too deliberate. Something large was out there, just beyond the edge of the light. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. Watching, waiting. My heart picked up speed, but I didn't say anything. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but that thing out there didn't feel like it belonged. I stood up, and my friends didn't notice. They were still lost in their own world. I excused myself and started walking toward the edge of the woods. The dirt path leading into the trees was faint, but it was there, just barely visible under the soft moonlight. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, just to clear my head, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I needed to get away from the fire, away from the noise, away from the growing unease that had started to gnaw at me. As I walked further into the woods, the sounds of the night became muted, as though the trees themselves were swallowing every noise. The path was narrow, and the ground was uneven, but I pushed on. The further I went, the more the air felt thicker, heavier. My flashlight flickered once, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move with me. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the cold. But the deeper I walked, the harder it became to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I don't know how far I went. Time became irrelevant once I left the firelight behind. The woods started to close in, the trees reaching out like long fingers, and the path became almost indistinguishable. My heart began to race. I could still hear the faint sound of my friends laughing in the distance, but it seemed miles away, like a world apart. I turned around to head back, but that's when I saw it again. In the distance, just beyond the trees, two glowing dots appeared. At first, I thought they were just reflections or maybe some animal's eyes, but they were too high off the ground, too still, too focused. They weren't blinking and they weren't moving. They were just there, watching. I froze again. I could feel my chest tighten, and a cold sweat crept down my neck. My hand gripped the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. I stood there, paralyzed. My mind was racing, trying to come up with an explanation, but none came. It was just those eyes and everything else. The silence, the tension in the air, only made the feeling worse. The wind kicked up for a second, rustling the branches around me, but those eyes didn't move. They just stayed locked on me, as though waiting for me to make the next move. I couldn't stand it anymore. I turned and started walking faster, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. The woods didn't seem the same as before. The trees weren't just towering above me. They were closing in, pushing me forward, trapping me. I could still hear the sounds of my friends in the distance, but it wasn't enough. I felt like I was getting further and further away from them, from safety. The trail was gone now. The ground beneath me was uneven, full of roots and rocks. My foot caught on something and I nearly fell, but I kept going. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually, the trees started to thin. The path opened up, and I saw the cabin in the distance. The warm glow from the fire flickered in the window, and I stumbled toward it. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The eyes, the feeling of being watched, all of it was too much. When I finally reached the cabin, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. My friends were still outside, laughing, unaware of what I had just experienced. I didn't tell them, couldn't. They'd never believe me. I sat there, alone, staring at the door, and I knew that whatever had been out there, whatever had been watching me, was still in the woods. It wasn't over. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The silence outside the cabin felt wrong, too perfect, too still. But as the first light of morning crept through the window, I heard it. A low, distant sound, like a branch snapping, a soft rustle, and then nothing. When I left the cabin the next day, I didn't look back. I never went back to those woods. But every now and then, when the night is too quiet, I feel that same feeling again, the sense that I'm being watched. And I know I'm not the only one who knows what happened that night. I'll never forget those eyes,